Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. February is Black History Month, and in commemoration of Black history, we present history right here on Focus on Liberia. Our topic today is the science of history, or you can call it the art of history. We're going to be running through introduction to historical methodology. Also, we're going to briefly touch on what is Black history and what's the significance of it. My guest, FOL public policy analyst Carl Fangler, also a historian. Carl, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Also in the house is PhD candidate in Liberian history, Mr. Jacien Carr. Brother Carr, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, we want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. This is time for history, and where better to listen to history than right here on Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. By the end of the day today, we woke up, we got the news of the sad passing of Professor Dr. Amos Claudius Sawyer. We are saddened by his homegoing. This is someone whose speeches I memorized when growing up as a child, and I call him the father of Liberian political science and history. Uh, Dr. Sawyer, as we learned today, has passed away, and he touched so many lives, and one of those is the person who's here tonight with us. So I turn the floor over to Mrs. Call Family to say something about that.
Thank you, Dennis. As many who know me know, Dr. Sawyer was very close to my family. I've known him my entire life. I used to visit us as children. But more importantly, he's who he is for Liberia. Dr. Sawyer, proud son of the founders of the Republic of Maryland. As we observe, the 200th anniversary of the repatriated Africans landing on the shores of Cape Mesurado and all along the Grain Coast. Dr. Sawyer's ancestors are some of those who landed at what was called at the time Maryland in Africa, became the Republic of Maryland before joining Liberia. Maryland, the Republic of Maryland, is actually the first republic in Africa. It became a republic before Liberia. This is significant because he comes from a legacy of self-determined freedom fighters. Dr. Sawyer, besides what everyone knows him for, being a freedom fighter, he is a founding member of MOJA. He went to Liberia College, which is the precursor to the University of Liberia. He went on to the United States, obtained his master's degree and his PhD, and went back home to serve. This is a man who lives his life in service to his people, and not only Liberian people, but Africans as a whole. Dr. Sawyer is respected all over the continent of Africa, and I'm sure the condolences are going to start pouring into his family from far and wide. He was a tremendous human being who a life well lived, and a great loss to his family, his community, all of us that he mentored, his friends, and of course to the country. When they say in the interior that a big tree has fallen, indeed, a big tree has fallen today, and may his soul rest in peace. The struggle continues. Thank you. That's what I need to say.
Thank you, Carl. And again, on behalf of all of us here at Focus on Liberia, we say sorry to the families, friends, and loved ones of Dr. Amos Claudius Sawyer. I still know pieces of his two speeches, the one, the 1983 oration, and when he delivered the papers of his political party, the LPP, at the Election Commission office right there on Ashburn Street. I memorized those speeches for a long time, but I'm getting old now, so they're fading away. And he was someone that I respected a lot. And as a child, I even learned to talk like him. Rest in peace, Doc. Today, as we said, is like Black History Month. So let's start with that and say when we say Black History Month, the place I want for us to begin is what is Black history? Where does that come from? What is the history of Black history and the significance of that day? Let's start with that as Carr. Begin with that, please.
So, well, let's turn it over to, if you don't mind, turning it over to Jacien for a minute, and I'll come in from there.
No, go ahead, Carl. You do that. You do the.
Okay, Jacien, I have something else for you because the whole idea of history, right? We say Black History Month, and we are talking history today. What is history?
I'll do the wait till I get to my slides, and I'll go to the whole thing. It'll be, it's comprehensive.
All right.
Well, I think, Jacien, what we wanted to do was just give the overview. I just wanted to try to catch myself a bit.
Yeah.
So
Okay, no problem. Yeah. So Black History Month in the U.S. it was what, if I remember correct, started as a Negro Week, right? Back in the early 20th century, it was that's how it was first came about. A Negro Week that's what it was called back then in the early 20th century, and then it grew, of course, and it was a a way to remember the history of African Americans and their contributions. But it was not until I think 1976 when President Gerald Ford, by decree, said we're going to set aside February, the whole month of February, as Black History Month. So Black History became a month-long, commemoration by decree when President Gerald Ford became president of the U.S. And it is a way, just it's a time set aside, like I said, to look at the contributions of African Americans, contribution to the U.S. historically, and a lot of places will give you different contribution that different African Americans have done over time in America. They will celebrate, for example, the Afrocentrist School. I'm probably getting it wrong, in Columbus, Ohio. This week are doing a Sankofa Day. As you know, the Sankofa, the Ghanaian bird, the story that reaches back in the past to know who you are. And so for like the Afrocentric School in Columbus, Ohio, they're having a Sankofa Day. I think it was today or sometime this week. I know it's this week. And they're going to bring in, different, people from the community here in Columbus, Ohio, to speak to the kids about, the past. And
right. Thank you. And I apologize.
Before you come on, Carl, at the beginning of the show, I play a song by Yatazo. All the pocket pickers, send them to Bele Yala. For those of you who are young and you don't know what Bele Yala is, this was a notorious prison in part of Lofa County, now Bapulu, reserved for hardened criminals. And so in the 1970s, perhaps, the whole idea of people picking pockets, especially in crowded areas like the market, was very rampant and became a public nuisance. So,
right.
The artist there is singing all those pocket pickers, those criminals, send them to the notorious Bele Yala. That's the history of that song. And so, in commemoration of Black History Month, what is more suited to play than that of Yatazo? And by the way, she's still alive. She's in Liberia currently. All the pocket pickers send them to Bele Yala. She's the same person who sang "Young Girls Start Drinking Lassos for the sake of Baple, Stop Drinking Lassos." That was the time young girls were committing abortion and dying from it because they were drinking this potion called that. Go ahead, Carl. That's a brief history.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so the predecessor to Black History Month was Negro History Week, which was established in 1926. And the reason, other than the fact that we needed to learn, but there was intentional and deliberate omission of Black people in history, not only in America, but globally. So part of the process of defeating and conquering people is to erase and remove their history, the context of their ancestors' contribution to history. And that helps to diminish people and diminish your self-worth. A way that you can smash a person's self-esteem is to smash, from whence they came. And that was an intentional process of, not only erasing history, but also usurping history, almost taking credit for the contribution of African people to world history. And so this was an intentional campaign for Africans in America and then eventually globally to reclaim, research, and reclaim their legacy and their place in human history. And I cannot emphasize enough why this was important, and that in fact, when the first thing that you do when you conquer a place is destroy their universities, destroy their schools, destroy their monuments, destroy their history. This is something that Africa has been subjected to: massive theft of our artifacts, of our legacy, distortion, and all kinds of things that we'll get into a little bit later. So it is not just a feel-good thing. It's not just something, oh yes, this is nice. This is the first Black person to go to space, or this is the first Black person, to win some prize. It's more of giving African people globally back, returning, their stolen legacy. So in 1970, it was extended to being Black History Month. And when I was an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota, what we did at the Africana Student Culture Center, we started National Africana History Month, and it stretched from late January all the way through March. We didn't think the 28 days was sufficient. But basically, we now refer to it as African World History Month. So it is about, we go back from antiquity to present, and try to celebrate and emphasize the contributions of African people to the whole process of creating human civilization.
Right. I think you preempted my question that it moved from Negro history to Black history. Now we call them African Americans. So you say now it's African world history.
Right. So Negro just means Black, right?
Right.
Negro just means Black. It means Black in Spanish and Portuguese. And then Black obviously is a color. It doesn't really represent a time, a place, a context. It's descriptive. Whereas the word African gives you history. Africa gives you identity. Africa gives you geography. It gives you a place on the planet. You're not just a Black person walking around without roots, without some type of a connection to something. All human beings are a product of culture, history, and referring to a group of people as African Americans gives them that context, their historical place, and it grounds them to their origins. And so it was African Americans that intentionally decided to say, hey, look, there's no place called Black. We are Africans in America. And the same way that European Americans and Asian Americans and other people connect to their history and that context, is the same way that African people felt it was necessary to not just be referred to as a color, but as full human beings.
So right now, when we say African world history, whose history does that include? Liberia, Ghana.
African world history is everybody on the planet's history. Our contributions to the elevation of humanity are so vast and so intricate that African history is everyone's history. The thing is, when you start talking about the building of civilizations, when you start talking about the philosophy, thought, the history of democracy, you talk about the history of agriculture, there's nothing that we can really discuss that doesn't involve contributions and even origins from Africa. So it is important when we say African World History Month, it is not only about Africans all over the world, but all people all over the world. So it's extremely exciting to a time of the year for a person that loves history like myself. And the thing is, there's always this continuous discovery and rediscovery. So that's the whole reason it's called, world history, because it is what it is.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is focused on Liberia in commemoration of Black History Month. We are talking about history today, the science of history. At this time, I bring in Jacien Carr, who's going to walk us through the art or the science, because history is a social science. So I was told to call it the science of history. Jacien?
Okay, can you put the first slide? Okay, and then you go to the next one, please. Okay, so pretty much, my name is Jacien Carr, as a brother Ja stated, and thank you also, Carl, for that great, lead. Um, and so what I am is I'm a PhD candidate in history, and my focus of my thesis/dissertation is I'm studying power associations in Liberia and Sierra Leone from the mid 16th century, from the 16th century to the mid 20th century. So that's my background, and I've been at this for a number of years now. And so my presentation, my lecture today is on the professional craft, the professional history as a profession. Okay, so and hopefully this could inspire one, two, or three people at the end of this presentation to follow suit, to go to school and major in history and take it all the way up if you like to. But hopefully this will give somebody an inspiration. So I'll start with the first slide. It's by Adam Doomsby. He wrote a phenomenal book on the Civil War here in the U.S. called The False Cause. But in the introduction, when I was reading the introduction, this really stuck out to me because this is a lot, gets to the heart of what we're talking about. So it says there's a difference between how historians and the public understand the past. For the purpose of this book, his book that is, history, what trained historians do is a reasoned reconstruction of the past rooted in research. So that's the thing, a reasoned reconstruction of the past rooted in research. Very important, reasoned. Okay, because depending on what part of history, for example, I'm doing 19th century history. Everybody from that period, they're dead, of course, and so I cannot go back and interview anyone from that period or before, from the 16th century to the 19th. The people are dead, and so what we're trained historians to do is, and I'll go through that as we go to the slides, is where we learn a lot of different disciplines that help us have a reasoned reconstruction of the past. So you may have to know about economics. You may have to know about, geology, archaeology. You may have to get basics in all these different social sciences to help you with this reasoned reconstruction of the past. Okay, can we please go to the next slide, Dennis? Okay, and you, this is your question. So what is the study of history? Once again, I'm talking about the professional study of history. History is the study of change over time. Okay, I'm going to say it again. History is the study of change over time. You do any history 101 in college or even in high school, AP history or history class, the teacher, you learn this. History is the study of change over time. Okay, so what do I mean? Can you go back one more slide, Dennis? Go back to the same one. Yeah, so and let me touch on this for a second. I should have done the other slide. So what we're going to do, like I said, what I'm going to teach today, what we're doing is the study of history as a science. What generally happens, or the way the general public usually sees history as a narration, a story. John was here, he went here, he met Sue, they did this, that. That is not what I'm talking about, right? That's, you see a lot of that online, these narration of history. So what I'm talking about here is the actual science of history that usually people take the finished product of and transform it into a narrative history.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So can we go to the next slide, please? So what do I mean by change over time? Okay. So you have a thesis, right? You have a thesis, and I'm sure everybody knows what a thesis is. You have a thesis, a starting point, because history are forces, right? They're forces impacting. So you have a thesis, right? And then an antithesis. They meet, they crash, boom, right? These two different forces. Thesis, the antithesis, they crash, boom, and out of that comes a new synthesis. Okay, so and these are forces acting on each other. Let's look, for example, at such a force. Let's take World War II. Okay, you had the thesis before the war, right? Before, say 1939, there was a thesis in in Europe. Okay, the war starts, boom, right? That's the antithesis. Is changing history now, boom, right? The end of the war will have a new synthesis, right after 1942 in human history. So that gives you, and you can apply that to different issues. So for another example, for example, let's say I'm interested in how people dyed their shirts in the 17th century, okay, which would be like in the 1600s, right? I'm interested in how people dye their shirts. That's where my interest is. And so, Brother Ja, so I see every day for 3 years, say from 1600 to 1605, you wore a green shirt, for example, right? Or different colors of green. You wore a green shirt, And then I look in 1607, all of a sudden you're wearing a red shirt. So now I have to investigate. I want to investigate what happened to Brother Ja. He was wearing a green shirt from 1600 to 1605. And when I see him again in the archives or whatever, he's wearing a red shirt from 1607 onward. What happened in that 2 year span that caused Brother Ja to change his shirt? See, that's the historian's milieu, right? So it's an investigation. So now we start to investigate that 2 year span. First, to see what happened. That's wearing the shirt is what is your first. The green shirt is your thesis, and then wearing the red shirt is your synthesis. Now I'm trying to look in the middle to see what the antithesis is that caused you to change shirts. And there could be many things. So you start looking, as best you can. Was there a war? Were you captured and taken to another ethnic group and had to change? Was that happening? Was there some kind of the dye you were using? Was there a shortage of that dye? Was it like a plant base and a shortage and this plant died and you had to go to a new color? So these are the things we're going to look at in that 2 year period. We have ideas. So you look at a lot of stuff, the topography, and you look at a lot of stuff, politics, everything to see what happened to you, Brother Ja, to make you switch from wearing a green shirt for 5 years, and then 2 years later you're wearing another, a whole nother color. I know it's kind of simple, but it just gives you a basis of what I'm talking about.
So in essence, let's say in Liberia we have tension in the country, and then the war. So the tension in the country, what was happening? That's the thesis. The war came, boom, right? That's the antithesis.
Yeah.
Then the result after the war, that's our synthesis.
Correct, and it keeps going on. It keeps going on. Exactly. So, and it keeps going on. It keeps going on. Exactly. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
And so, and what the historian does is to study that change.
Right.
That change in between. What happened? That change. And that's what we call a reasoned reconstruction of the past. I'd say in my case, if people are dead, I cannot go back and ask anybody that I study or I read that what happened. Why did you do this? So I have to look all around them. Right, I have to look all around them, all what's going on around them, to see if I can try and deduce to the best of my ability. I'm going to say it's the best of my ability, right? And that's one of the reasons why I always caution people on using the word the true history, because what I discovered today is based on the information that I have, right? That we have discovered to this point. Okay, that's what I have. So you make the best case, right? It's like a lawyer. You're making the best case. This is what, and in my writing, I was in my training, I was long ago trained to say it appears, right? To the best of my, it appears. because I've written it. You've done this piece of research. Okay, let's say 10 years from now, somebody else is going in some other archive somewhere, maybe Portugal, Italy, who knows, Ghana, and they may find another document from that time that will shed light on the issue, either supporting my position or refuting it or adding more nuance to it. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So there's just like Professor Boros and the document that was recently that he at the University of Chicago archives that he brought to light. You see what I'm saying? Showing more. And that's why we have history, because we're always studying these things, right? You know, so what I produce today, I go, this is the best of my ability, boom, this is what I have. And then somebody else may come next year, 2, 3, 4 years, who is studying this and say, oh, wait, Jay said this, but maybe let's look at this again. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all, right? That's our profession. I welcome that. I welcome that. There's nothing wrong. We're not going to get mad at each other and be, oh, you know, like none of that. We're professionals, and we all know that, you know. I remember one of my professors in my master's. He was a great professor. He was funny. In England, he was also my supervisor at the time. Great man, great professor of history. He at the last class, he made a joke. He said, "If any of you ever, you know, do other research and question my work, you better make sure you're correct." He was laughing, you know. You better make sure. If you can get it in your mind to someday say, I'm going to challenge, you know, like, you know, you better make sure. He was joking. You better make sure that you're correct, because if not, I'm going to come back at you. You know.
Exactly.
It was, yeah, and I will talk about that process later. It's called the peer review process. So it's a great book. If anybody would like to get this book, like I said, I want to interest people in getting involved, you know, in this science. It's a beautiful social science. It's historical theory. If you have the means, you know, you can order it on Amazon or maybe your local bookstore. It shouldn't be that expensive. But well, in relative terms, okay, I'm fully aware of people's finances. Don't want to be insensitive. But can you go back to that book, please? So historical theory, what do we mean by that? This book talks about, I mean, there's simple things that we take for granted. For example, time. How do you measure time? We take that for granted because, you know, other conventions have been in place and done that. So how do we measure time? So I'll give you an example. And different areas have different ways of measuring time. So like historical time. So for example, in the West, and they have biblical time, you know, they got different time. And where does time start, right? So you have also biblical time and so forth. But to keep things simple, we'll go with, for example, it's standard convention in the West, right? That in the Western canon, in the Western thinking of history, that history travels in a straight line. Okay, historical times travels in a straight line, right? And that's why my professor had a beat out of me when I say history repeats itself. Because as a professional historians, we don't say that in the Western faith, because it travels in a straight. It's gone. It's gone. You can't go back here.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone. That boom, it's gone. Right? It's gone. What can happen is you can learn from the past, because certain things can give you clues to make better decisions. But the conditions are never going to be the same, right? That's the thing. The conditions are never going to be the same. Let me take, for example, like I said, impeachment history, right? I'm not taking sides, I'm talking impeachment history. So as you know, in the recent impeachment history here, they had the impeachment of, well, the whole time of Nixon and the last president, right? And so the Democrats kind of, to my think, they try to recreate that whole Nixon era impeachment ambiance, but they couldn't do it. It didn't work for this century, for this time. Two different periods, two different times, two different, part of American history. Okay, so that's historical time. Now, the Marxist historians read time differently, which is fascinating, right? So a Marxist historian sees history as traveling in a circle.
Yeah.
In a circle, right? And it's the material dialectism, right? It travels in a circle. Thesis, synthesis, antithesis, and it keeps going in a circle. So you could say, I'm pretty sure you can do this, but you could say for that, you could say like history repeats itself, but it's not. But so that just showing you two different ways of historical theory, historical time. So Marxist theory is history traveling in a circle. In the West, we say it travels in a straight line. And like a book like this gives you a good different things. So a good example of things we don't think about, but what historians have thought about as they do their work. That could be the next slide, please, Dennis. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do, the first things you're going to do when you embark on is you have to know your subject, which means you're going to have to read a lot. You're going to have to read a lot of books written by, because you want to understand what people know, what we don't know. More important, what are the themes, right? The themes, THEME. What are the different themes that exist in the literature? And usually when you're doing a PhD, you write a literature, and a master's, you write a literature review. So you read as much as you can, a lot. You got to read the different themes, the different who said what, blah, 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 blah. And you write about the themes, so you got to be well versed. And that's books, that's journals, that's, and you have to know who are the principal people in your field who have written and what they've written. And then you also have to go outside. For example, I had to read anthropologists. I had to read other social science because that all fits in, like reading concepts of ethnicity. There's a whole book out there of what ethnicity is by brilliant social scientists, who have written to say that ethnicity is porous, what it is, how people, the clan base, this base, or whatever. So you have to read all these things. And then you try and do your research design. This is a great book. I used this book in my PhD, and I think my undergrad also, master's, on research design. You have to build your research. Okay, so there's a lot of thinking that goes into this. Okay, so this book will tell you how you're gonna build your research, how you're gonna start your question. You're trying to figure out your theory, your question, and then from there, how you're gonna plan it. Okay, so are you gonna use archival sources, right, in the archives? Are you gonna use oral history, oral tradition? We need to imply economics to understanding your subject. Are you gonna need to go, archaeological research? So you build your entire design from point A to Z on how you will conduct this research. And in their research, it can include field work, right? So are you going to have to travel to Liberia for your research? Are you going to have to travel to Congo, to Angola, to Zimbabwe, to France? Are you going to have to go to the archives in Portugal because that's the only place you can drill down in the 16th century to find these records, So you add all of that in your research, and that's why these studies take time. A good history book takes years to come out, years. Because of course the big thing is you need funding, right? You need the money to be able to travel, get a hotel, hire staff sometimes, research assistants, you need, it takes money, and we'll get into that later because you have to apply for grants and et cetera, et cetera. And it's very hard to get grants. I mean, because they want to make sure, they give you that money, it's going to go to use, and the project is, but if you're, if you prove yourself, you can get, bigger grants, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. So research methodology, and then this goes to your point. You were asking about research methodology, okay? And that ties into research design. So your research methodology, okay, it's your research methods. Again, how are you going to conduct your study? Oral history, oral traditions, archives. What are you going to do? That's your methodology. And you write all this out. Your professor, when you're in your PhD, you have to write this out. They have to know how you're going to do this work. Are you going to, and for example, if you're doing research in sensitive countries, right? Let's say you're doing research in a country that's has major ethnic war or ethnic strife is going on at the time, and usually as a PhD candidate, you probably won't go there. They'll embargo you in certain countries, and that can hurt your research. But let's say if it was tolerable that you could go to X country or Z country, then you have to learn, you add in your methodology, how you will protect your sources. Because when you get there, you're talking to people on the ground, to help you with those who want to help you, right? Those who want to help you. And so you got to, sometimes you cannot call them by name. You have to anonymize them in your research, you see? So you think of all of this into and then also research methodology, language. We'll get to that at the end. So if you're going to, if your subject matter deals with Portugal, or let's say China, or whatever, Japan, you're going to have to be proficient if it's Japan, maybe like in kanji or in Mandarin. You're going to have to know how to speak it well, and read it well, right? I'm going to repeat that. And that's part of the process. You're going to be heavily, and the school will usually put you in intense language class. And why do you have to do that? Because when you go to the archives, like say whatever in Beijing or wherever it's located, it's not in English. You're reading it in the language that they have recorded their history in. You see what I'm saying? So you have to be able to read in that language and, of course, speak to people in that language to get it. You see what I mean? And so that's in your methodology. So if you're looking at Portuguese sources in the archives in Portugal, you have to be able to speak Portuguese or read Portuguese, because I remember in my research, I was going way back in the 16th century, there were some Portuguese words that don't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And I had to go on Facebook and ask all my friends, hey, because I have friends who speak Portuguese. Hey, I have some words here, I don't know what they mean. There's none that, and ironically, none of them knew, because they're fallen off the lexicon, the dialect, it's fallen out. And so that's still a question. I have not resolved that yet. Hopefully one day I will be able for that part, as I build the project more, get into that. So I just use the actual word that is used, right? I just put that there. And so that is your research methodology. Okay. I hope I'm not boring anyone and that we're getting a good lesson here. And like I said, I want to, I'm enthusiastic. I want to get people to go do this stuff. This is a very good book on writing African methodology. This is a great book, and it's an edited volume, and it has a lot of African historians, which is great, who have added their voice to this, right? So you have African historians and so forth who write, and the reason why is because a lot of times when in the past, when people wrote about Africa, they wrote in colonial language, and it was pejorative, like Carr, Sis was telling us, the whole Black history, and it goes to her point. The whole black, from Black, Negro to African American, right? How you express yourself, right? You see, and Sister Carr did a phenomenal job, and so this book here makes you do an introspective look at yourself and language that you use in describing certain things, because language is very charged. I don't have to tell you that. How you describe something can be very charged. So, and that's one of the things during my PhD, in the earlier part of my PhD, one of my advisors, when I would write a paper, like an excerpt or a prep, half a chapter or whatever, and show it to her, she would say, okay, Jay, so why are you using this word? You see what I mean? Why are you using this word to describe that? Right? And part of your training in your first year, and it's ongoing for me, it's always ongoing. We go to this training to learn your biases, because everybody has biases. We learn these things as we grow. We learn these things as we grow. We grow your biases, right? And these biases can come out in your research, right? And it can affect your research. So one of the things we do is these exercises to try and understand your biases. Very important, because the craft is you have to be humble. You have to be very humble. You cannot be arrogant. You have to be humble, and you have to be objective, not subjective. You have to be objective. If you become subjective, then what you end up with is a polemic piece of writing, right? Mm-hmm. It's polemic. So you cannot be subjective. You have to be objective to the best. And that's why you have your advisors and people like that. And then later on, when you're writing books, you have editorial reviews and they go through all that. But this is a great book. If anybody wants to get this book too, it's a phenomenal book. And it goes to different things.
Mr. Carr, one minute. So who does this, right? Is it for, let's say I'm interested in learning about something. I'm not really going to write a history book.
Okay.
This is the methodology I'm going to go through.
Yes, I mean, if you're interested in something, you should get methodology. It's a good way to start. Get read the methodology, because like I said, you want to learn something and you'll get the tips, right? Okay. Read those. It's great. You'll learn the tips, practice them out, and then, read some good history book to see how the person, once you read the methodology and research design, when you read it, you'll see how they put it together. You see what I mean? Because this is the finished product. We're reading the finished product. When you understand that, you be like, he did this or she did this. Look at the oral history. Look how they merged that together. You see what I mean? Look at that reasoning. So that's a very good tip. Thank you for that. Thank you for asking that question. Thank you very much. We can go to okay. So I'm going to take you. This is the DNA, the heartbeat of a country, the National Archives. One of the things that breaks my heart is, unfortunately, during our first civil war in Liberia, our archives, the main one, was heavily damaged. Was heavily damaged because and that's our DNA. It's such a pity because that stuff we go back to try and make a reasoned, picture. So I did a lot of research in England. This is the British National Archives, a phenomenal place. And the British have several different, but this is their National Archives. They've kept their documents of England, in these phenomenal institutions, and they preserve them. So you need special places to keep these documents, right? Because these old the books. I mean, let's look at a book. If you leave it out for a while, pages fade, etc., etc., etc. And imagine keeping stuff from the 1600 that you can still look at today. So they have these archives where they preserve these documents and where they're kept, and then what happens is you have to set up an appointment ahead of time to go to the archive, right? Because it's very strict. The security is tight, of course. You can only imagine the security at these places because they don't want you to go in there and steal a document and take it out. For example, when you check in to the archive, you take the security guard would pat you down. It's not like a library. They pat you down. You open your bags. They look in your bag. They do this when you're going in. They do it at different stages. Okay, they do it. This is the front. They open your bag, blah blah blah, and then you go to a special room in the back where you take your coat off and all this in the bags. You put everything in the locker. They give you a locker. You can only carry a pencil, your cell phone, because you can take pictures without flash, a notepad and stuff like that. Then you put it in a transparent paper bag where they can see in, and that's all you can carry with you. Then you get your ID card, right? Of course, when you go to the whatever area you're gonna go to, you show your ID card, they swipe it, and then look in that bag, and then you go to the circulation desk. And before that, of course, you have to go through a class on how to use the archives, right? So you have to go and pass a class, and so there you go, and they will tell you when you need to wear the white gloves to handle the documents because you can't get your fingerprints or smudges on them. And then some of these books are so old, these ledgers are so old that they're falling apart. So they give you pads, how to put the pads and how to open like a baby. You got to put stuff down, it's about cloth, and you put the book and you open it. It's fantastic. I mean, what the whole science involved in this. And so if we go to the next slide, that's more the archives. I'll show you how beautiful the place is. I mean, they're really to hold the prestige of their country. They've dedicated this. Next slide. And that's and it's beautiful in the summertime. You come do research here. When you get tired, you just come out. They have a restaurant on the bottom floor right here. A restaurant. You can just sit outside, watch the wildlife, the ducks and so forth. And then great. And then that's the building here, the National Archives. So that is we're going too fast. Go back one more time, please. So that's the entrance of the British National Archives. Beautiful building, like I said. The amount of time and energy and the awareness of their government, right? That's the most important. The awareness of their government to know that we have to protect these documents for and sometimes you go here, you don't only see historians, you see people who want to look by their family. You see a lot of British people, retirees, phenomenal. They'll be in there, they'll be looking, trying to find their looking at their grandpa or this person, their auntie, because the records are there. So they're in there doing that, and they will sit and chat. Oh yeah, that's so and so from so and so village, when so and so, because they can find all their lineage, and you will see retirees. It's so cool to see, in there just looking up their past. So they look at their own history, right? It's in there, and of course you will see people from all over the world. I ran into many Americans in there. They come to get the money, to funding, and they're coming here to study something in England, and they're there from all over the world. You meet people there, Okay, they can do the next slide, please. So there's I can show you inside what's in these boxes, for obvious reasons. So when you order a box, right? So it's not like a library where I want to get a library book. Say I want to get let's say I want to get Lord of the Rings. You go in there and then boom, 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 they get Lord of the Rings and they give it to you. You know what I mean? And then you go, I have my book. I check it out, go home and read my book. The archive's a little different. They're grouped by subject matter. I mean, it's a practice. So, for example, you see that CO267-436. That's this box, right? So what I did was, when you go to their website, you put in clues, right? Like Liberia, 1920, or Liberia, 1840, or you put in somebody's name who lived there, so a famous chief, or you put in a boat. You put in something from that period and see what comes up. Right, and so it will generate a bunch of numbers. It's like this box here will be like box CO2 contains information from this year to this year in Sierra Leone when the British were there, right? And so then you have to make a guess. See, archival research takes a long time. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack a lot of times. So you have to take a guess. So you take a while, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. But you take a guess. I said, well, I'm going to get this box because what I'm looking for may be in there. You see what I'm saying? What I'm looking for may be in there. So you get this box and you could have 2 or 3 or 4 ledgers of different things. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll show you. So here's the ledger. This book is the original book, colonial officer's book from the 19th century. One of them, they have many, but this is the original book. You see, I ordered it. And the return by doesn't mean, you see the time I took it, the date I got to bring it back, my name, blah, 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 and I put that there. And so I just look at this, it's written in cursive, the old cursive. It's the same, that's the people, somebody wrote on this book way back in the 19th century. It's phenomenal to see. I'm holding something that some human being held this book and wrote in it. It's phenomenal when you have the respect and the awe that comes out of somebody who is long dead, held this book and was recording information in it. And now I'm privileged enough to come and look at the information that they wrote. It's phenomenal. And so you look in it like this one here, the word cursive. So it's hard to read. The real cursive, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's hard. And you're trying to pick out words like that, and it's hard. But like I said, after time, you get the skill. And I'll tell you a story. I remember one time at the archive, I ordered a bunch of boxes, and I was tired. I couldn't find anything the whole day. I saw a lot of interesting stuff, trust me. You get carried away, but nothing that I needed, you see, for my research, right? And there's a whole day I spent going through this one, that one, this one. And guess what? I was about the very last item in the last box was what I needed. You see what I'm saying? So the very last item in the last box, I'm like, let me open this. And there it was, boom. So that's how it is. Sometimes you go, you find gold right away. Sometimes you go a whole week, you don't find anything. And then you're allowed to take a picture only. You can use a camera without a flash, or you can use your cell phone or iPad, whatever, without a flash. And of course, the reason why you don't use a flash is because it will damage the material. It will erode the writing. You see what I'm saying? It will erode it. And they have beautiful maps, all kinds of stuff in these archives. Can we go to the next one? So here's another one in the U.S. I did research at U.S. Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And of course, the U.S. Library of Congress has the ACS records. Everybody's always talking about ACS. The ACS documents are all there on microfiche. I mean, I've seen them with tons of microfiche. Because they're not books, they're on microfiche. You got to put it in the machine. You know what I mean? And then the machine's all computerized now. These microfiches are so high tech. You feed the film in, and then you hit the button, and it goes. Goes back and forth, and you can save it to your flash drive. And that too, to use the archive place, you have to go through. You got to get cleared for that at the Library of Congress. All these things you have to get in there. Show your credentials, etc., to give you your ID and how to use it. So I've done a lot of work at the U.S. Library of Congress. It's a beautiful place too. Beautiful place to do research. Phenomenal place to do research right there. Smack. I know a lot of people here probably live in the D.C. area, in D.C. Maryland area. I know a lot of people in the Virginia D.C. area, so you'll recognize the area right by Congress, etc., etc. Can you do the next slide, please, Dennis? So now we're going to go to what I've done a lot of research here. Okay, so we have the Liberian collections at Indiana University. It's a phenomenal place to do research. And see, these are the boxes I'm telling you about. You see that? These are all boxes. I ordered all those boxes. I don't know what's in them. So you got to go through all these. I mean, you can take a year going through this stuff, because I needed information. So I said, well, let me order these boxes. They give you the number, because what I need may be in here. What I need may not be in any of these boxes, but you have to go through them, and it's so time consuming. One box for me can take, if I really want to do it right, if I'm not in a rush, to go through one box maybe 2 days. 2 days. Think about that. And then you get tired. You got to stop. But to go through the items in one box, to take that. Some boxes take you a lot more, a whole week. You spend a whole week in one box, 2 weeks in one box. Going through the records there. So the Liberian collection of Indiana is very, it's a phenomenal place to do research. They have a lot of stuff. I mean, I even came across President Talbert's green book. When he was doing green, the whole green initiative. It was in there. I was like, wow. I mean, I didn't need it, but like I said, it was just stuff you find in these boxes. Like wow. And I'm like, you can go to the next one, please. The next slide, brother. So that's me there at the archive. There you see, I have my the same thing here. Same thing goes here. No school bag, none of that. You can take you see, I have my iPad to take pictures, and I have my pad and notepad to take notes. Where I found this box, etc. And so that's me at the archive of Indiana. No, too fast. so that's the archival work, and that's pretty much, depending on what type of history you are, that's you're gonna live in an archive. You get to love it. It's very quiet. Like I said, you can't. And then once again, like I said, you just cannot walk in an archive. You have to make an appointment. Why you're there, what you want. You get clearance. You make an appointment. Like in the Indiana University Archive, they have an office where they're watching you all the time. They got a person there who watches you all the time while you're in the archive. Make sure you're not taking anything, destroying anything. They're watching you all the time, right there. Okay, we'll go to the next one now. So now, after you've gotten all your paperwork, you have to write it. Okay. Now you're trying to write you're trying to write your research, right? And a lot of times, you take you take a theme, and you write your theme. You're trying to flesh it out in a peer review process, right? You're trying to flesh it out to see how people will how to accept it, right? You're trying to flesh it out to get feedback from other peers, historians, okay, whatever. This is my first paper, so it's called when you present papers on different subjects. So this is my first paper. It was at the European, I think, Conference of African Studies. The Europeans have theirs every 2 years. And this year it was held in Basel, Switzerland. I spoke. That's the conference table before I made my presentation. And it was my first one, and it's very intimidating. It's very intimidating. I mean, you got to practice what you're going to say, your research, because this one you have from all over the world. You have historians from South Africa, from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Italy, from England, from the United States, from Australia, from if Zimbabwe, you know what I'm saying, Ethiopia, they all come. And there's a different conferences. So you look at the brochure, you go which one you want to attend, and you have your name where you're speaking on. So people were interested in this, what I was talking about here. There are a bunch of us, there were about 4 of us who spoke. So they come and they sit there and they're all staring at you. You don't know who these people are. It's very intimidating. I remember this is my first conference. I was so nervous that that the paper I was reading went blank. I couldn't see anything. It was there, but I was so nervous as I was reading, everything went blank. And I could hear people in the back, is he okay? Is he okay? You know what I mean? And papers were shuffling, like, is he okay? Is he okay? And then I was able to recuperate myself because it's so intimidating, And they ask you tough questions. These people, these professionals, they're not there to sugarcoat it. They're going to ask you hard questions. Like, I remember the professor from South Africa, after I got done, he said, well, what is your methodology? Go back to your question, Brother Ja. That's what he said. Because what is your methodology? And I was able to answer the question correctly. Because if you don't, if you're off, your work is a fraud right there. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Right there. If you're not, if you have that doubt, because all these are professionals, they're there to learn from you. They want to know, because you're presenting the newest research on this stuff, and they want to see, because they could use it. You see what I'm saying? And the one thing that man asked me, he goes, but what is your methodology? How did you come up with this? And I was able to give it to him like that, right out of my tongue. And he said, okay. And that validates, my position. So this was in Basel, Switzerland, beautiful city. You go to the next one, please? This year at the Liberian Studies Association in Illinois a couple of years ago. I think it was in outside of Chicago, at one of the universities there. And the LSA is pretty cool. I like it a lot. It's one of my favorite conferences to attend every year. It's a great gathering of different. Actually, I want Carr and I to present a paper there one of these days. But I got you. We're going to present a paper. Okay.
Absolutely.
And I want these. It's it's beautiful. It's a great time. You learn so much, and it's interdisciplinary. So you have history, you have economics. You see some brilliant Liberian minds here, and people who can come from Liberia, and brilliant minds, on different aspects of Liberian studies, not just studies, right? So I remember Professor George Clay always gives good papers, and so forth and so forth. So that's the Liberian Studies Association, and they also print out
the journal.
A journal, correct. And I think that year I was presenting on warfare in Liberia during the 19th century. Right, there was a history of I was doing Liberian military history, so you can see some different times where we're marking different wars and things that happen between the border region there. So Carl, we'll go into one of these. We're gonna present a paper.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going. This year it's in Texas. It's in
and Dennis will sponsor us.
Yeah, Dennis, we need the money. So, Focus, if you guys got the money, you got to sponsor us a hotel room. Well, usually at the conference at these campuses is great because you can stay on campus. Usually during the springtime when school's out, beautiful. I forgot what the school we're at here, but I stayed on the campus, the dorms.
I'm not staying on anybody's campus. Past that stage.
And this is and this is me at the giving
Been there, done that. I've suffered through that.
This is my giving a paper here at the society. My first love was military history. That's what I did my undergrad in my history, but my era was military history. So that's another history that that's a African history has supplanted that for the most part now. So that's my focus. But when I first started in history, it was military history, and then I gravitated now to just focus on Africa and Liberia in particular. And this is at the Society of Military History when they had their conference here in Columbus, Ohio. And this is one of the biggest ones in America. And it was a good time. Of course, by this time here, I had practiced more, so I was more, at ease. So, and then we go to the next one, please. Okay, excellent. So now We were talking about this, Dennis, earlier, and um, one of the ways you get the information out there to your peers is through the peer review process. And I told Carl also we need to get a paper also in one of these journals, the peer review paper. So when you have peer review is, you coming up with new ideas, new theories, etc., etc. You write it in the paper, and it has to get accepted. You can just send anything. It will go to the editor, it will go to and then they will send out your paper to two reviewers. They don't know who you are, right? It's blind. They don't know who you are. Your name is not said. This paper is from Brother, Dennis Ja, and you don't know who the reviewers are. And it could be experts anywhere in the world who know this, who are familiar with this work, right? So it'd be anywhere. I've done peer review myself. I've been contacted to peer review somebody's paper, and it's a very tough process. It's very tough. I mean, they don't mince words. I remember one of my. They'll tell you first of all, they will give their advice to the editor. Yes, this work is good. It should be in this publication. Okay. But then they will say, this is what the writer or the author needs to do first. This is not ready for publication yet. And then they tear your work apart. You have to have a tough skin. Because, I mean, I remember one time a guy said this, the writer with me goes, he's frustratingly vague. It's like, he wanted to know what I was talking about. He was frustrated. Because he's frustratingly vague with this point. I can't get, I don't understand, and then you have to, so then you go back and you fix what they say you should fix, and you send it back, and they go back and forth. You send it back. So it could take years to get your work published, that's why, and then when it gets published, it ends up in a journal, right? And then you get to read, and it goes out for dissemination for anybody, professionals, researchers to read. And then sometimes people still give their feedback, and so you've had some of these long running back and forth with some of these professors, fascinating work. But these are some of my favorite. African Affairs is great. Then you have the middle one is the Liberian Studies Association, which is a very good one. It's the only one in Liberia. I think it's the oldest journal, African journal. I'm not sure. I'm not sure because I know Nigeria has and other, but I think Liberia may be one of the first. I'm not sure. Don't take this as fact yet. I'm not sure. And then you have the Journal of Military History, which is a good one. That's a phenomenal one. Just different aspects of different military history. China, U.S., African. People write Italy, just great stuff. And then you have the African Studies Review. That's done by the Americans. The African Studies Association here in the U.S. And they also do a very big conference every year, the ASA. So this is just give you. So that's the whole. And this is how we're making history, right? So this is how you're making history now. So it's coming out to publication for people to read. Okay, and then you'll go to the next one, please, Brother John. And then you get history books, right? So I picked up a few here. We have these are, go to the editing process. You have to the left, everybody knows that's Professor Dr. Boros' book, Between the Cola Forest and the Salty Sea. Great book. I've used that one a lot. Down, you see the President Doe and President Reagan. That's Dr. Dunn's book. I'm sure some of you have seen that book on the U.S. and Liberian Cold War relations. Then to the right, the Zambai book is a pretty fascinating book because he does a history on the history. He does a history on the historiography. It's fascinating. So he analyzes the history that's been written by Liberia. So he's a history guy writing on the history, right? The history of this historiography. Then the last book is my good friend Vamba Sharif. He's a Liberian Dutch, and he writes historical fiction. Some of his works. And this one's A Land of My Father. It's a phenomenal book. It's a great book. A historical fiction, a book that uses history, but then creates a story, a fictional character that moves through this history. You see what I mean? So it's his history, but then it's so you can learn from it because he's adding in actual historical events, but then he creates this character and you learn the history through this character. And this one book is pretty good. I don't know, man. You should tell the bicentennial about this book. This book is a phenomenal book. It's about African American in the United States at the beginning of the whole Liberian experiment, the whole going back repatriation experiment. So it's a love story. It's a love story where the gentleman in this story, I guess I read it, it's been a long time, so I'm kind of hazy, but I know he was enslaved, or anyways, he buys the freedom of his, well, it's a love story between two people, right? She goes to Liberia before he does. Okay, she gets, and I don't want to ruin that story for you. So
I think we should, let's just keep focused on the methodology so we can have some more discussion.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're interested in that book, you know.
You did a good job plugging his book. I'm sure he won't be disappointed.
Well, it's woman palava, I'll put it that way. When he goes to Liberia, he's found somebody else. So she goes to Liberia first, he joins the ship, goes, and she finds his woman palava. But it's a good book. So and all these people have had to do tremendous research to take these books out. I mean, I have no idea how long Professor Burroughs took for his book, or Dr. Dunn, but it took, Dr. Burroughs and Dr. Dunn, but I know it took years. It took a long time to get these books out. Okay? And then, go to the last one. Like I said, you have to know foreign language. Like I read and speak fluent French. Voyage de la côte occidentale d'Afrique fait dans l'année 1786-1787. So you have to know, because of course with Liberia we have Cote d'Ivoire, we have Guinea, right? So our history is intertwined, and so knowing French and speak and read French fluently helps me to situate my subject matter better. So a lot of times I have to read French, books written by African scholars, from Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, to get to try and situate my subject matter. And so pretty much, basically that's what I wanted to present to you. So it gives you a full range of what this, it's kind of like a lecture, History 101 mini lecture, gives you a little range of what a historian does. The whole process of being a history versus what you don't see this behind the scenes. And as you can see, I have a lot of books behind me. Carr's always making fun of me, but I use all these books all the time. It's crazy because you have to keep referring to them for one thing, for this to help situate myself, and so and then I have journals, stack of journals and stuff. But so that I hope, like I said, I understand the issues with studying history, because you need money, right? You need money, and it's hard in Liberia. We understand that, but I would highly ask. Oh, my cat's up. I would highly ask that people, if you have the opportunity, especially our people here, if you have the opportunity and you have the time, you have the stuff, go, try and get to take on the mantle. There are a lot of funding vehicles here you can use in the United States, grants, loans, and so forth. Apply for scholarships at different universities. Right. So I'll say, please, let's take on so we can get more Liberians writing their history. We need more. We need more Liberians. And with that, I will say, I hope we've learned something. I've learned today too. We learned something here, and that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this.
We'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Tanneh-Chewlae.
We want to welcome all of our viewers from across the globe. This is Focus on Liberia. Our topic today, the science of history, commemorating Black History Month. Carr?
Yes. So thank you very much for that very detailed and free class that you presented, Jacien. I think it's important that people understand that history Though it's fun to discuss ideas, but the process of obtaining information is tedious, time-consuming, and expensive. It is not something, unfortunately, that, as far as people think, you can just go and, oh, I'm just going to go to somebody's website or something and just, understand everything. It doesn't work that way. It is an academic exercise. So I think you did a brilliant job of laying that out. I do want to add, for people that are in the United States, the U.S. does a great job of preserving records at all levels. And even your local library, you'd be surprised. Most public libraries have reading rooms and public archives that you have access to, and they will show you how to. And for those who don't need special training, typically they'll just kind of show you, okay, you can look at this through a glass. Artifacts, historical artifacts, are kept at museums and archives. Also, microfiche and other things, they'll show you how to use those things. Jacien talked about the Library of Congress. We also have the archives, the National Archives Museum in Washington, D.C. The Presidential Library museums are also available for public access. National Archives research rooms for the National Archives that were created in the 1920s, I think 1926, which is there to preserve all of the historical documents and records. For that, you do need special access. That is more analogous to the British National Archives. It's much more difficult to access. They do have some things available for the public and for students, even elementary school students that have little things to get kids interested. One of the things that I hear a lot when it comes to history, the question or the comment that I hear a lot is people will say, oh, why y'all always worried about the past? Let's focus on the future, and Liberia needs to forget about its history. And what I always respond to this is, what country do you admire or do you want to be like that you consider to be great, a great success story that has forgotten about its history and somehow moved forward on nothingness? That country does not exist. The United States, that most people in the world want to emulate, is history obsessed. Everywhere you go, there's monuments to history. The amount of resources, both public and private, that go to the preservation and restoration of history is unprecedented, I think, anywhere in the world. Right here in Georgia, I mean, you've got massive historical museums and sites. I took my daughter to a fort in Tybee Island in coastal Georgia, and they had this massive fort with all this Civil War era. It was used during the Civil War, but all the Civil War era, history was like a living museum. You could walk through and see where they would keep prisoners of war and, where the soldiers slept. I mean, it is this country, this United States that everyone wants to be like, is literally history obsessed. There's also a political aspect to history that we need to talk about. And why is it that the United States and other countries are so obsessed with creating a historical narrative and also bearing the history of those that they conquered under the weight of their own? It is because history gives you a self-esteem. It gives you something to stand on. It gives you shoulders to stand on to reach for the future. If you do not know where you've come from, you won't understand why and how the world became to be organized the way it is. And you will have nothing to propel you forward into the future. This is extremely important. When we talk about historical accuracy, history is often weaponized by politicians, by conquerors, against those that they conquer. And if you do not know who you are and where you stand in the context of history, it is easy for you to be erased. This is important. The human beings have a natural reverence for those who came before them because they know it is through them that they came forward. It's almost a religious connection to your ancestors because we believe in God, but we know it's through these ancestors that we came forward. And this is not unique to Africa. Every human being has that consciousness. They want to honor the people that are responsible for their existence. For some reason, when you talk about conquered people, that reverence for history is erased. Conquered people have a tendency to hate, distrust, and reject history because they think that their history, belittles them. They have been convinced that their history lessens them. So they want to separate themselves from it. They want to erase it. And it is because and it's not accidental, it's intentional, because that's what's done to people when they're destroyed. So in order for us to have that renaissance, in order for us to have that confidence, for us to move forward as a people, we need to resurrect that what has been buried, has been taken from us. And that is the memory of our past. And how do you do that? You do that through research and methodology, oh my God, I can't speak today. You do that through methodical research, what Jacien was just presenting. It is not something that you can just pull out of a hat. It
And
is
call
something.
to that point, because someone who conquers try to erase your history, and you two feel that, okay, I mean, if I know this, I'll be lessened because the person who conquers me wrote my history. So you're saying you have to go and methodically study this. Where do I look? Because the history written about me is all about how I was overpowered.
So there's two things, right? So you can read a book that's already complete, and you can also do original research. History is a study of documents. It's a study of things that have been documented for the most part, right? So people have a tendency to think that, oh, if I go and I study this, they're going to be calling me, a savage. Yes, they will call you a savage. Yes, they will say these things, but it's the context. You know that at that time period, this was a language that was used to describe you. But you have to learn through research to pick sense out of nonsense, right? You don't say because racists documented things, I'm not going to study what they documented. It doesn't help you. For example, most of the names of our kings that existed in the 16th century were not passed down through oral history, but through written records. So whether or not they called King Siaka a savage, a barbarian or not, we know he existed because someone wrote his name down. We know about Balsa. We know about all of the great King Peters going back to the 1600s. The King Peters of Meserado going back to the 1600s because someone wrote their names down. And the beautiful thing about Liberia is that it was established by people who were literate. There's a counter to that as well. Some of the conquerors who wrote history wrote Arabic. So some of our conquerors wrote Arabic, and those documents, some are still in existence. So it is not only Europeans that wrote African history, Africans also wrote African history. And the oral tradition is also rich. I like to look at oral tradition and compare it to the written records.
Exactly.
Help me try to put things into time frame, because unfortunately, a lot of the oral tradition has no dates and times, because that's not our culture. January, February, counting years. We didn't do that on the Grain Coast typically. So that's something that we have to look at. I've recently realized that a lot of the history that people think, oral history that people think dates back to the 1800s, is actually from the early 1900s. And that's very unfortunate, because that part of the oral history doesn't have dates and times. So people will be recalling things that happened like in 1908, 1920, and they think that these things occurred in 1820. And because there's no dates and times to the oral history. So I've been finding that very interesting as I go through documented Liberian oral history. I'm like, oh, this person was alive, during the time of Berkeley. Oh, okay. This isn't really ancient history. This is, and so you can start to see where things get skewed. Even, talking about, one of the things that we discussed on this platform once was this connection between Sao Boso and boatswain, and how some of those connections have been skewed because the oral history doesn't have dates. And, we can go on and on. Studying, things like Lot Carey mission, Lot Carey Mission, 1908. Conflicts that happened in 1908 attributed to 1822. You know, things like that. So we have to really dig into this with an open mind. And as far as Liberia is concerned, I think for me the most beautiful part of this journey of exploring Liberian history is understanding the tremendous contributions of people who were already existing here, or not here, there on the Grain Coast before 1822 to the process of liberation and independence. And the more you understand about Liberian history, the more you understand that Liberia did not exist really until they asserted their independence in 1847. Prior to that, we had a series of colonies in conflict and under basically the supervision and rule of a foreign entity, a foreign philanthropic organization. So, you know, there's a lot around that should have been discussed. You know, before we talked about this so-called bicentennial, I think people should have really taken the time to consult people who have spent their lives researching this stuff. The messaging was skewed. And I bring that up to say that history, in a political sense, as a public policy person, history is what you use to mold and shape national consciousness and identity. If you don't do that with intent, if you do not do that with correctness and as much accuracy as possible, you risk destroying the ties that bind us as a people, the things that hold us together. There should have been public policy people, along with historians, political scientists. There should have been thinking people from different disciplines sitting at a table to construct or reconstruct a national message that would heal and unite the Liberian people around this tremendous and profound history of ours. Instead, they approached it like it was a party. They approached it like it was a fun time, an economic opportunity, which it could have also been, but that should not have been the center of this. They took something that should have been sacred to the country and they made a mockery of it because they didn't take the time to bring the correct people to the table to plan it properly. So this is something that is extremely unfortunate. As we move forward as a country, this is something that needs to be at the forefront of the people's national consciousness. This is where leadership comes in, priorities come in. If a government, if a country doesn't understand their responsibility to creating a national message, to creating and developing a national consciousness, to creating and developing a sense of patriotism in their citizens. If they don't understand their role, they have failed miserably. Nothing else they do is important.
Thank you, Carl.
Let I add one thing, please. Great. Carl and I have discussed this, you know, and she clicked my memory here. We've discussed this issue. And I'm going to borrow the words from a very brilliant historian that I heard last week. Reading history backwards. And I'm going to give an example of this. So, for example, when you talk about the United States and what in 1822, the America you're talking about, the United States you're talking about, is nothing like the United States that emerges after World War II as a superpower. America in 1822 was, I think, 24 states. Now it's 50. They hadn't even gone to California. The West, the move to the West, you know, that was a danger. I mean, you know, the America of 1822 was not a superpower, was far from being a superpower.
Exactly.
The great superpowers were the United Kingdom and France, etc. the American War of Independence. America would not have won were it not for France, right? Benjamin Franklin had to travel to go, and others had to go to France to beg the French to jump into the war on their side, right? And the French Navy, etc. So you're talking about a country at that time where, it was still in flux and trying to see what it is. I mean, the America of 1822 is slow walking its way to the American-owned Civil War. They have huge internal issues. These what the countries go through when they're forming different ideas. Who we are, who controls what, blah 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 blah, and that America is slow walking towards the Civil War that will have this crazy effect and kill hundreds of thousands of people and devastate, And you look at, I know I'm just trying, like I said, it's reading history backwards. So
no, what I want to ask is, how does that connect to the founding of Liberia? Because what you're saying is we're looking at the founding as if America was like today.
So what I think Jacien's trying to explain is that when you look at today and you look at history through the context of today, and you think that everything that exists today existed, 200 years ago, you won't understand the past. So in order to understand that Liberia wasn't actually established in 1822, you have to understand why there was a need to repatriate people back to Africa. Two, you need to understand who was repatriated back to Africa. And the third thing you need to understand is who were the ACS and what was their goal for the people that they were repatriating back to Africa. These three things cannot be understood if you think of the United States in the way that you think of it today. Right. A lot of times when people are looking at history, they'll say things like, oh, the settlers, they'll call the repatriated African settlers, they'll say the settlers were wicked to us. They did not include us in their constitution. And if you compare the Liberia Constitution, 1847, to the U.S. Constitution as it existed without the subsequent amendments, the way it existed in 1847, the Liberian Constitution was far more progressive, pro-African and revolutionary. The U.S. still had slaves. The United States still had human beings as property of other human beings in 1847. The United States of America did not recognize our humanity in 1847, and therefore did not even recognize our independence in 1847. They shunned their noses at us in 1847 when we became independent because they still owned human beings. And our president and other politicians tweet and get up and give speeches saying things that are completely historically inaccurate, giving credit to our for our self-determination to people who did not even recognize our humanity when we exerted our self-determination. You should not be a politician if you have not taken the time to understand how Liberia got to where it is, but you want to be president.
And Carl, that brings us to this whole thing. You said politicians weaponize history. So I want us to look at politics or political science, and then we look at history and literature, right? Because politicians always use history to make their point. So what's the difference between political science or politics and history? Where the two come together and where they differ?
They're intertwined. They're lovers, right? So political science cannot exist outside of the context of history. And historians have to study political history because they're studying the history of human activity. And most change is driven by politics. So historians are also studying the history of politics, simultaneously. So the two fields of study are lovers. They feed off of each other. When I say that history is weaponized, it's weaponized by informed politicians. Uninformed politicians bastardize history. They make things up. They misunderstand things. And they rule foolishly when they attain power because they don't have the historical context to stand on. They don't understand the world. If you don't understand history, you won't understand the world. You won't be able to properly govern. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. So the most effective leaders in Africa have always been those who are deeply rooted in understanding history and the context of their existence. And then they get their direction from that. They know how to move forward. They know what kind of decisions to make, what kind of decisions not to make. Most of the leaders that we admire, even today, are the ones who are very well versed in history. If you look at Rwanda, Rwanda's president is a very big, he's steeped in history. He talks about ancient history of Rwanda. He has, used the history of his people as a catalyst for their renaissance, for their forward movement, for their self-esteem. That's what has given Rwanda the confidence to move forward, is that they have reverence for who they once were. And they're saying, we were great, we will be great again. Look at our ancient ancestors. Look at who we are. And so this is what motivates this generation of Rwandans to move forward to greatness. But in Liberia, our politicians have no idea. You never hear Liberian politicians quoting Edward Wilmot Blyden or Didwo Twe or anyone. What they do is they quote Albert Einstein. Yeah. They quote, Americans. They quote everybody but their own people. And they speak of Liberian history with such hatred and disdain because they're ignorant of it. And so they'll say things like, oh, the country has been existing since 1847. We haven't done anything. Oh, since 1847, why is Liberia still like this? If you were enlightened about your history, you would be telling the public, this is why Liberia is like this, and this is what we're going to do to move forward. But if you're still raising that question, you're not fit for leadership because you will not be able to do the things that are necessary to move us forward. If you haven't studied the problem, you won't be able to solve it. History also studies the problem.
Jacien, there's also this concept, and this lady Ngozi talk about the danger of a single story. When it comes to Liberian history, is that the danger we're facing, or is it that?
No, it's history in general. That's why I say history. That's what I said. The whole concept of a true history is dangerous, and you shouldn't use it because there's no single story. That's why we have peer review, right? And that's why I said you'll write something today based on the information you have.
Right. Based
on the information you have, you make the most reasoned picture that you can put on. You see, that's because people are not well versed, that they don't know what's out there.
Right. Exactly.
People don't know what is out there in the sphere of Liberian studies.
Exactly.
Like I said, that's why we have the Liberian Studies Association. You see what I'm saying? There are a lot of different things people write, and that's why you have these peer reviews. Peer reviews are arguments. You see, it's not a single story. Peer reviews are arguments. Those are professional arguments. I lay down an argument. It's good enough. It appears in a peer review journal. First, it goes through 2 or 3 different academics in the area who say, okay, this is good. Put it out there. So I'm reading it, and then one day Carr gets it. She's reading it. No, I think Jay is wrong in this. Then she offers a rebuttal. You see? Then she writes a rebuttal to my thesis. Says, Jay, you did a great job, XYZ, but I have a question on this part. See, that's the thing. This whole thing, that's because people don't understand what's out there. And this happens all the time. So what I write today, 10 years from now, or 20 years, the college daughter is doing a PhD in Liberian history, and she goes somewhere and she finds a piece of document that could challenge my work. And that's perfectly fine. That's a difference. Right. That is perfectly fine. I'm not going to take offense to that. Like you will see, it's perfectly fine. I welcome that because then I can have a discussion with her and say, okay, so because then I will learn. And then you offer a new, and so that's yeah.
That's the problem we always face when it comes to Liberian history, right? And let's say Riverside Pro say A.W. Bank-Henry should have never been taught in our schools. Everything good, it was about the panel, blah, 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 right? So, as you said, people come up with rebuttals. it seems to me that in Liberian history, when you come up with these things, there's a lot of, I don't want to say antagonism, but people are saying, oh, you want to destroy the history of the ex-slaves, or you want to destroy this, or you, like for instance, there was an argument here where they wanted to change the name Monrovia, and people saw that as an attack on those that came from the Americas. So that part of history, how do we deal with it without it being confrontational?
I think it's because of, we're unfortunately we had this crazy these wars. The wars destroyed a lot of the educational, the educational continuum. Unfortunate. It's an unfortunate event. And the way you do that, and Carr, she's a public policy person. I'll let her speak more to that. But as a student, the way you do that is through education. People need to go to good schools.
Exactly.
They need to go to good schools. They need to learn social science in high school. Because you learn this stuff. You need to learn history. We need to invest in the educational system to go to good schools. Because then you will be able to process this information better. You don't have to go to college, but you have to go, I'm not saying everybody, but go to a good school. Like, in the US they have AP history for gifted students, You know what I mean? We need to, but I'll let Carl speak to that, the public policy. But that's what I was saying.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with the good schools issue. I have noticed that a lot of people are not able to think critically. They're not able to receive information that they haven't heard before. We've unfortunately raised a generation of people who reject information the moment they hear it, without any type of questioning or critical thought. They're taught to memorize something, and the first thing that they memorize is the last thing they want to know. And if new information comes, they're not receptive to even contemplate it. They don't even want to think about it, give it any thought. So I see that a lot. Someone will say, I'll give a prime example. Most people, and I didn't know this, but most Liberians are under the impression that the Nautilus and the Elizabeth, the two first ships that took people to Sierra Leone before they were transferred to Liberia, most people are under the impression that those two vessels had all African Americans who were, as far as African Americans being people born in the United States, whose ancestors served as slaves in the United States, and most Liberians just think that. And so when someone says, no, actually, a lot of these people were recaptured Africans that were in tribunal, that were illegally, brought through the transatlantic slave trade, and that the 1819 law was to remove people who were enslaved in Africa, by illegally and brought into U.S. territory. That was the original reason for the 1819 law. African Americans were looking at places to remove them to in the West, which was new territory. They were like, we'll give them some land in the West and give them all 40 acres and a mule and send them far away from us here in the Northeast, and they can start their own, stuff. And then it was like, no, get them out of here altogether. Get them far away from us. So basically, I've always known that the people that were on the Elizabeth and on the Nautilus and many other subsequent voyages were born in Africa, not in the United States. But for some reason, Liberians in general don't know that, and that shocked me. And it gets back to this really not getting into depth in history. So we talk about Doris Banks. Doris Banks wrote books for children. Those are like elementary school history books. I don't think she was really writing, for even high school level, or definitely not university level. So the question then becomes, if you start out with Doris Banks and these little feel-good stories, they have them in U.S. history. You talk about George Washington cutting down a cherry tree, bunch of stuff that didn't ever happen, but we talk about these things in first grade, second grade as children in the United States. As you grow up and you get to about fifth grade, you start learning more history in more depth with more information. By the time you're in ninth grade, you're getting more history, more social studies, you're learning in more depth. By the time you graduate from high school, you should have a much deeper level of understanding of American history of world history. You know, in Liberia, it seems that they stop with Liberian history at Doris Banks at elementary school level. So they don't really get in depth. And so the average person, they just, oh, they freed the slaves and went back to Africa. Well, who were the slaves that were being freed? What does that mean, freeing slaves? Are we talking about the recaptured Africans that were rescued from these slave ships? Are we talking about plantation owners that willed freedom to their mulatto children that they had with slave women? Are we talking about people who were self-emancipated, who bought their own freedom and worked hard and bought the freedom of their family members and went to Liberia? Are we talking about people who repatriated to Liberia from Sierra Leone, who were descendants of repatriated or recaptured Africans? What are we talking about? There's no depth and no understanding of even the diversity of the people that are considered settlers. And what of the people who were rescued from places like Tradetown in Bassa and from Galenas, when Galenas was destroyed? Most of those people ended up in Liberia and were baptized and Christianized and given English names. So when they talk about, or even King Peter's clan that joined the settlement before independence, you know, many what we call indigenous Liberians were part of early Liberian society and assimilated, you know, before 1847. We never talk about these people. We never talk about any of this stuff. What happened to the students that were taught, you know, in the Baptist missions, in the Methodist missions in the 1800s and became Christian and changed their names and became a part of Liberia? You hear this very simplistic story.
Yeah.
And we talk about weaponized history. We hear the simplistic story. The settlers came, they ruled everybody. Nobody went to school. Nobody did anything. 1980 came, now we're all Liberian. I mean, it is absurd. And again, it's because the education system is so terrible, you know, when it comes to social sciences, that nobody has even put into the curriculum real factual, you know, information for people to learn. Yeah. And everyone doesn't have to be a historian, but everyone should know who they are and how they got, how the country was established.
Sure.
You know?
Thank you so much. I'm really, what I got out of that is from the both of you is history is not really taught in our schools, and the schools are not putting out the factual history for people. And Carl, you are right when you said like most librarians don't go beyond A. Doris Banks Henry's. I mean,
which is literally elementary school. Is elementary school level book, you know.
So thank you all so much. I want to thank our viewers for staying here tonight with us. Let me conclude by asking now, Jacien, we went through the methodology, and we gave some examples. Who is a historian?
A historian is anybody, you know. But you have professional people go and become, you know, a professional historian, or you can have amateur historians, you know. I think it's, you know, it's, you know, like I said, one of the things in closing, one of the things I would like to inspire, hopefully, you know, is for people to go, you know, if I know it's difficult in Liberia, so I'm not, you know, I understand the challenges, and I'm fully, you know, sympathize with that. But if, you know, you're young or not even old, whatever, you're in the U.S. and you have the time, like Sister Carr was saying, you know, if it moves you, go to school, get a degree in history. You know, you can still work. You know, being in the U.S. is lucky. You have tons of funding mechanisms here. You have grants, you have FAFSA, you have scholarships, you have, you know, if you apply yourself, get a degree, and if you like it, go higher, go all the way. You know, if I would like to inspire, you know, I hope you can inspire one person. That'd be great. We've done good. You know, I wonder, or at least get people, you know, to look at it more seriously,
right?
To look at the product more seriously and with an open mind. So I say the thing is, have an open mind. Be humble. Be ready to receive new information. I mean, Carr and I have several good conversations. I learned from her. You know, we have conversations done behind the scenes, and I'll learn from her. And or she'll make me look at this thing a different way than I looked at it before. And that is very good. That's interdisciplinary. I respect her mind. I respect her field, her expertise. She respects mine. And so we'll throw out ideas. We may have little, you know, informed arguments, because I have this, I have that. But that's how you put pieces together. Then I go, oh, I got to look at this a different way.
Yeah.
Because, and that is the beauty of it. That's the, like you said, political science, history of lovers. That's the beauty of the process. People should embrace it. That's have an open mind, be ready to receive new information, of course, challenge it, do it respectfully. Respectfully. I can't do that enough. Do it respectfully, talking to you. So I'll leave in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Call your closing comment.
So I just want everyone to know that the history is a study of yourself. It's a study of your family. It's a study of your community. It's a study of your country, your continent, your world. Without history, we won't understand the present. History is everything that made today possible. And in order to understand how the world became organized the way it is, in order to understand why there's poverty in certain parts of the world and why other people are wealthy, in order to understand, period, you must look back. And in order to correct and move forward, you have to go back to that fork in the road. Like one of my favorite historians, Dr. John Henry Clark, always says, we have to go back to that fork in the road and see where we made the wrong turn. And we have to correct it. And that's the other thing. History, within the study of history, it lies the solutions. If you have a problem, you need to solve it. You have to study the problem. You have to understand the problem. Then you proceed to solve it. So history isn't about living in the past. It's about understanding the past so we can fix and correct and most importantly, plan the future.
Thank you so much. Tomorrow, Tough Talking Thursday, we have two unapologetic seditions who are going to list for us the unprecedented moves by President Yeyia to etch his name in the annals of history. We have some who don't believe that, and they're going to be discussing this. Also, the Hour of Politics with Ansoni Sia, the Joe Boakai Unity Party press statement, right here on Focus on Liberia Friday, February 18 at 12 noon. Also on the Hour of Politics tomorrow, Mr. Ansoni Sia will be sitting down with the superintendent of the Monrovia Consolidated School System, Professor Isaac Z. Lakpo Zago. You don't want to miss it. Carl, Jacien, I want to say thank you so much for
Thank you for having us. Thanks
this
to the guests.
is part of the Black History Month. It continues all week. Keep tuned. I want to thank our viewers also for watching, even those who will watch later. As
Brother
always,
Jack, quickly, one thing, please. Sorry. River Crespo asked a question. Feel free, River, on books for your daughter to read. Please feel free to message me or call, message us. I'm sorry I just saw that. I was reading the notes. So feel free to please message me, or I'm sure Sister Carl, and we can send you some, some examples. Thank you. Sorry about that.
so
Yeah. Sorry, one quick thing. Also, please order Dr. Sawyer's books. They're on Amazon, The Emergence of Autocracy in Liberia. And then that's a wonderful book that I just recently read again. But order Dr. Sawyer's books in honor of his memory. Just go to Amazon, put his name in, Amos Sawyer, and you will see everything that's related to him. He has a wonderful political history of Liberia called The Emergence of Autocracy in Liberia. Thank you.
all right. Since you started it, James Davidson, my question is, who wrote the first history of Liberia? All right. On that note,
I would say the answer to that is really quick. Sorry, Dennis, I know you want to go. The answer to your question is Edward Wilmot Blyden.
On that note, we want to end with the song that always says, we are all Liberians, and let us study Liberian history and don't believe that just a single history or a single source will provide everything that you need. Go beyond that. There are so many sources now. Librarians are writing in the archives everywhere. There's history. Good night and God bless.
God bless.
Yala Libera is our home. Libera people. me Liberian.